Welcome, everybody. Good afternoon. I'm Andy Rich, and I am the Dean of the Colin Powell School here at City College of New York. We are the home of the social sciences, as well as the public service, business, and leadership development programs of City College. And this is a big day for us, because today with this event, we are launching the Social Mobility Lab at City College. The Social Mobility Lab aims to advance understanding of how higher education, and particularly public higher education, accelerates opportunities for students, their families, and the communities from which they come. We're interested in how we achieve mobility, defined by wealth and income, to be sure, but also by quality of life, increased security and freedom, and the fundamental opportunity for people to live the lives they desire. Why launch this lab at City College? For many of us today, the answer is probably obvious. Study after study suggests that the City University of New York is among the most effective engines of social mobility in the United States. As David Leonhardt wrote in the New York Times in 2017, reporting on research by Raj Chetty and others, CUNY has, quote, propelled almost 6 times as many low-income students into the middle class and beyond as all 8 Ivy League campuses, plus Duke, M.I.T, Stanford, and Chicago combined. Our success is clear, but we know far less about how we do it and the methods and resources required to scale and replicate our success across higher education. The lab will aim to figure that out, to be a place to support work that answers these questions and that advances and raises the profile of public discussions about social mobility nationally and across higher education. The lab's going to be a hub for research. It is a place for teaching and experimentation, and our approach will be distinctive, not just about knowledge and learning, but also about the community we serve and geared toward the implementation of solutions. We'll learn more about what drives social mobility, and then we'll translate that knowledge directly into programs and practices to help the students here move up in life. More than 15 of my colleagues have been working with me on plans for the lab for almost a year now, including faculty from every social science discipline at the Colin Powell School. With today's event, we begin to broaden the discussion, and I thank you for joining us. There are several parts to today's programs. Later this afternoon, we're going to have a panel discussion with 4 people who can speak from firsthand experience about social mobility. They've achieved it, and CUNY has been a part of how they've achieved it. And they'll help us anchor the lab's work at this institution. We'll also enjoy reflections and closing remarks from CCNY's president, Vince Boudreau. Today, we hope to begin a conversation across our community that will extend and expand substantially in the months to come, with more events, with research. In fact, we have an active call for proposals for research grants right now across CUNY, and with a range of new initiatives that will make up the work of the Social Mobility Lab. So this is really just the beginning. And we begin today in our program with Paul Tough, who for more than a decade has been writing about higher education and social mobility. Paul Tough is a best-selling author, most recently of The Inequality Machine, How College Divides Us, published in 2019 and updated and re-released in paperback in 2021. He has 3 prior books. Paul is a contributing writer to the New York Times Magazine. He's worked as an editor at the New York Times Magazine and Harper's Magazine, and as a reporter and producer for the public radio program This American Life. And he joins us today via Zoom from Austin, Texas, where he lives. Paul, welcome. And thank you for being with us today.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
So he and I are going to spend about 30 minutes in conversation, and then we'll have a chance for the second panel. So Paul, let me begin by asking how you got interested in these subjects. As I said in my introduction, you've been thinking about and writing about higher education for a decade now. How did you get interested in that, and how has that interest evolved over the years?
Well, I've been writing more broadly about education and children for 20 years. My first book was set not far from where you are right now in the Harlem Children's Zone. I wrote a book with man Jeffrey Canada and the amazing experiment that he was doing there. And a lot of that was starting at birth and even before birth. But the questions that he was asking are some of these same questions of social mobility that you and I continue to ask, which is how do young people from disadvantaged backgrounds succeed? What kind of supports do they need? What kind of qualities within them and their families are beneficial to them as they make their way through life? And so wrote a few books that were mostly focused on early childhood and on K-12 education. But when I started paying more attention to higher education, I realized that those were really the years after high school, where there was so much divergence in how people from different backgrounds were doing. That there were already lots of differences in terms of the success trajectories of people from different backgrounds. But starting at age 18, the choices that young people were making, and the choices that were being made for them were having a huge effect on how they did. So I wanted to learn more about what that was all about, what kind of institutions and what kind of interventions were helping to level the playing field and provide more opportunity for especially low-income students.
Yeah, let me pick up on that because, in your book in 2019, The Inequality Machine, you mobility was a major topic. And you said, as you just did, mobility today depends in large part on what happens to individuals during this relatively brief period of late adolescence and early adulthood. And you point out that young adults who do not have a college degree are almost 4 times as likely to live in poverty. The unemployment rate for Americans with only a high school degree is double the rate for Americans with a bachelor's degree. And, the college can have an effect on life expectancy, on marriage, on divorce. Talk about what you've learned about the power of higher education in relation to social mobility.
I think for a long time, economists have been able to point to very sort of standard financial outcomes as a benefit of going to college. What they call the college wage premium was always quite clear that on average, young people with a BA are earning more money on average than someone with only a high school diploma. Right now, it's about 2/3 more on average for those who have a BA. But what I think has really emerged more in the last decade or so is this research from sociology as well as from economics that shows this increasing divergence in just the life trajectories in every possible way. I mean, the life expectancy, literally how long we live, has started to diverge in ways that were not true before. And it really does feel, I think, more now than it used to, and to the detriment, I think, of the country as well as to lots of individuals, like we are living in 2 different countries. One with people who have the benefit of higher education and one where people don't. And we are dividing along that line more than along any.
Thanks to Raj Chetty, the Harvard economist whose names we've already said a couple of times today, he unlocked big data in ways that's made it possible for us to track social mobility. I will say he's an economist, but I was grateful, as are my colleagues and friends in sociology, that you flagged sociologists as playing an important role for much longer in tracking and understanding social capital and social mobility. But he did something new with this big data, and we know from his work that City College and other CUNY campuses are among the most successful in creating social mobility in the entire nation. And you wrote about this in your 2020 New York Times Magazine article, that most of the top mobility-enhancing colleges were moderately selective public colleges, including from New York City and the rest of New York State. At City College, you said, which is part of CUNY, 76% of students who grew up in the lower economic quintile, meaning families that earned less than $25,000 a year, moved up to the top 3/5 of the economic distribution in young adulthood. So we were, near the top of Chetty's list. You've read Chetty's work thoroughly. I think you know him. What do you think accounts for the success of places like CUNY, moderately selective public colleges? Which is a funny label for us, by the way, but still, we'll take it.
I'm going to start with sort of a negative answer, and then I'm going to switch to a positive answer. So the negative answer is that you are taking advantage of a group of students, of the existence of a group of students that the more selective colleges are not. So part of the reason I think that public colleges like yours are doing such a good job is that the most selective colleges, those Ivy League plus colleges that you were mentioning before, do not admit or enroll many low-income or first-generation students. And so there is this population out there of ambitious, intelligent, hardworking, smart first-generation students, especially in a city like New York, who don't have the benefits that their richer peers, especially those with college-educated parents, do. And so it has long been the tradition at City College and other institutions like it of helping working class young people find another alternative to the pathways that are open to their richer peers. And so that's part of the answer. The other part is, I think, is that City College has spent a lot of time over the past couple of decades, especially, looking at ways to support those students. So I did a lot of my reporting at the University of Texas, which has some similarities to City College, though some differences as well. And what they found is exactly what City College has found, which is that there is a vast number of low-income, first-generation, hardworking, intelligent students who are ready to succeed at high levels in higher education. But there are also obstacles that they face. Financial obstacles in terms of preparation. Often they've gone to high schools where they didn't get the same kind of preparation as other better off students. And so they don't need a huge amount of support, is what I think both City College and UT has found. That if you can find ways to intervene in the lives of lower income, first generation students in ways that are really targeted at those obstacles that sometimes make it difficult for them to succeed in college, you can have a huge effect on how likely they are to succeed. So I think that's the other thing that City College has done a great job on over the last couple of decades, is focusing on what kind of obstacles get in the way of lower income students who are trying to succeed, and what kind of interventions can get around those obstacles.
Do you want to say a bit more about that, like what the obstacles that you saw in your research and reporting really were the most important ones?
Sure. Well, I mean, the most straightforward one is just money. So it is really remarkable when you talk to, I mean, both when I've talked as a journalist to high school students and college students, but when, economists do it, when poll takers do it, money is the thing that students tell you is just a huge obstacle. And sometimes it's not a huge amount of money. Sometimes it's subway fare. It is, a $500 loan or grant to cover an emergency. Those are the reasons that they are dropping out of college, because they can't find a way around those obstacles. When you can't afford the subway, you can't afford the subway, and it becomes really difficult to succeed in college. So that's part of it. Then I think the sort of more nuanced answer is that sometimes there are obstacles that are more cultural, psychological, emotional, that especially when you're facing those sorts of practical obstacles, small setbacks can really feel huge, just like a fight with your roommate, a negative comment from a professor, a sense that like the students in my calculus class don't look like me, or don't have the same background as me. That can all really feed into a student who's already under pressure, feed into their sense that I don't belong on this campus. And so some of the interventions that I think are most important, beyond the financial ones, are psychological ones that really figure out how to give students the message, you belong here. There's often lots of messages, you don't belong here. But one thing that psychologists have found is that, and administrators at universities have found, is that if you are targeted and strategic about how you deliver those positive messages, you can make a huge difference in a lot of students' lives.
So we have this great story that we're going to call ourselves this now, moderately selective public colleges, can make a big difference in the lives of young people. And, City College, CUNY are certainly at the top of that list. Public higher education drives mobility and opportunity. And yet, as you point out in your work, and this is a direct quote from one of your pieces, from 1980 to 2015, states cut their fiscal support for public higher education almost in half. I wonder if you might comment on that, how it happened. You've written about this, and why it happened.
Well, it depends how much of a conspiratorial mood that I'm in on any given day. I think it's been a series of really short-sighted decisions by governments at all levels of American government, the federal government, but mostly state governments, because they're the ones who mostly fund education. So beginning in the 1980s, state governments began to cut how much they were spending on higher education, on public higher education. And one of the things they found is that there was so much need among working class students for higher education that those students found ways to go, even if they had to spend a lot of money, including money that they didn't have. The student debt market sort of started to kick in at that moment. And we created this method where students without a lot of financial resources could still go to college, could pay for it instead of the public paying for it, and would end up saddled with lots of debt. And sort of gradually, a lot of ideas about the difference between public and private started to change in the 1980s in the United States. But this was one of the big ones that we just started to feel like, well, if college is such a benefit to the people who go to it and graduate, it really isn't a public good, it's a private good. And that was this sort of enormous shift in how we thought about education and how we thought about higher education. You know, we don't think about high school that way, right? High school is also an enormous benefit to the people who go there. But we don't have a problem thinking that that is a public expense, most of us anyway, that that's a public expense that we should share together, because we know that having a lot of high school, a community with a lot of high school graduates is better than having a community with a lot of high school dropouts. But for some reason during those years after 1980, we stopped feeling that way about higher education. And for a long time, I think the system kind of carried on mostly by saddling students and their families with more and more expense and more debt. But I think the stress fractures are really starting to show.
Yeah, no, I want to pick up on those stress factors, because you had an article last fall in the New York Times Magazine that's gotten a lot of attention about the real drop in public confidence that has been precipitated by exactly the variables that you just mentioned, especially the cost of college, but also the lower completion rates at a lot of colleges, leaving students not only without a degree, but also with debt. And I wonder if you might just say a bit more about the findings you wrote about most recently, and kind of what the trajectory you think we're on right now is.
Sure. So there has been this big shift in public opinion in the United States just in the last 10 years about higher education. Americans are turning against higher education in all sorts of ways. And however you ask the question, whether you say, is a college degree worth it? Is higher education a positive force in American life? The numbers have gone down sharply just in the last 10 years. And there are lots of explanations for why that might be, and I talk about a few different ones in that article. But I think a lot of it comes back to money. That as student debt piled up over the last couple of decades, and as tuitions went up so sharply for so many students, the sense that higher education was an option just started to seem less likely for a lot of students. And I think as mostly we focus on the positive economic impact of going to college. But for some students, especially those who don't graduate, there's a really negative impact. So, I did some of my reporting for the Inequality Machine in a small town, rural town in Western North Carolina. And in that community, there were lots of people who were going off to college for a couple of years and coming home with lots of debt and not good job prospects. And that message was spreading throughout that community, throughout individual families, that college is not a place of opportunity. It's a place that saddles you with real difficulties. Not only do you kind of feel bad and they don't treat you very well, but you're also in worse shape when you get back. And so I think that sense has sort of fed on itself and has created this system, ironically and somewhat tragically, where that has made a lot of Americans less willing to support higher education. They're like, it's a ripoff, so therefore we shouldn't raise our taxes to pay more for higher education. When in fact, that's where the problem began, right? Because we are not, as a public, not supporting higher education enough, we're creating a situation where we're putting all the pressure, all the stress, all the debt burden on families, and they are rebelling.
So I guess one question is, what are we to do? And in particular, what are we to do as we launch the Social Mobility Lab and we think about how we connect the dots between higher education and social mobility, and try to have a go at how that can be a powerful message, that we're living through this moment where there's not only declining trust in higher education, but there's also a repoliticization of higher education and its purposes. And you're in Texas, which is where it's happening in a particular way. And I think a lot of us associated with the Social Mobility Lab, and we have the opportunity to do it from New York City, think that mobility might be the most potent public purpose of higher education, and that it's our job to tell that story and to make that resonate at a more intense level. But I wonder if you might speak to that and what your suggestion or advice might be.
Well, I am very curious to see what you and the Social Mobility Lab accomplish over the next few years. I'm going to be watching carefully and reading your reports, reading your research. But I think there's a great need for lots of different answers to lots of different questions. And to my mind, I'm sort of especially curious about the sort of the small picture answers and the big picture answers. So the small picture answers are, without spending more money, how can we spend more money more efficiently? What are some relatively inexpensive ways that we can help more students succeed and graduate, and admit more students, find more students in more different high schools, create a better pathway to positive futures for many more high school graduates. And in my own reporting, I found lots of interesting interventions that sometimes some of them financial, some of them psychological, that seem to be doing a good job of leveraging resources to make a real difference in terms of who succeeds and how many students are succeeding. But then the larger case that I hope that you're able to make is that we shouldn't be thinking about how to do this on the cheap. We should be replicating what used to what happened in the early years of City College, that what's happening in countries around the world where the public is really investing in public higher education in a much more robust way than we are doing here. And I think you find two things. So I'm originally Canadian, and I've spent some time over the last couple of years in Canada speaking to peers, my friends who've got kids who are going to college. And in Canada, as in most other OECD countries, there's a much larger public support for higher education. As a result, college is a lot cheaper. And that does a few things. So one is it just, you just don't have families and students who are saddled with huge amounts of student debt the way that we do here. But it also creates a different culture around college. It makes college less anxiety producing. The end of high school does not feel like the end of the world the way that it does for so many students in this country. And I think trying to put numbers on that, trying to show how failing to invest in higher education hurts us, and how investing in higher education as the public helps us, not only helps individual students, but helps all of us. That, to me, it's a really hard case to prove, I think, using the tools of economics and sociology, but I think it's the most important case to make.
Thank you. We've covered a lot, and I thank you for that. And I want to mention, by the way, that the Social Mobility Lab is going to be a center for research. Events, experimentation, but research fundamentally. And I mentioned this as we introduced the event, but I know we've got a lot of people watching on the live stream as well as here in the room. There's a call for proposals out right now for anyone across CUNY, faculty, doctoral students, who have subjects that relate to these very questions about how higher education in the United States can affect and be affected by social mobility, and we invite you to be a part of that. But Paul, we've covered a lot, and I just want to ask one last question, and I pose it in part to frame what will be the next conversation among our panelists. And you touched on this actually in one of your answers. So in The Inequality Machine, your book, you write, quote, "While upward mobility may be good for a nation, it is rarely a smooth and straightforward experience for an individual. Upward mobility is not simply a question of earning more money than one's parents. It's also, for many people, a process of cultural disruption, leaving behind one set of values and assumptions and plunging into a new and foreign one. It can be disorienting and emotionally wrenching, shattering family ties and challenging deeply held notions of identity and purpose." This is, I think, very powerful and important. It resonates at City College. Almost 60% of our students are the first in their families to go to college. Half are immigrants. It's a feat for many of them to be at college, and it can be hard. So I wondered, from your examination of so many different colleges and universities across the country, what have you learned about what colleges like ours should be doing to support student success, and particularly our students?
I mean, I think two things. I mean, partly what I was trying to say in that passage was that even with the best interventions, it's always hard. It's like there have been novels written about this for centuries, about what it's like to grow up in one set of circumstances and then you spend your adulthood in a different set of circumstances. It's always jarring, however you get there. And so I think part of what has to happen is just sort of a recognition and a sensitivity to that. And usually upward mobility is a really positive story. And so we just tend to think like, oh, these kids should be so happy, should be so grateful. And they are in many cases. Lots of the students who I spoke to, I'm sure lots of the students who are succeeding at City College. But it's still very difficult. And I think being aware of that, being sort of psychologically attuned to that, is an important thing to do on a human level as well as on an institutional level. But I think there are things that institutions can do. And for me, the research that is most compelling in this field has to do with belonging. This kind of mushy psychological idea that it matters if you feel like you belong in a certain place, in a certain institution. And I think to a lot of people who are used to higher education, whose parents and grandparents went to college, being on a college campus does not feel like being in a foreign land or a different planet. It feels like home. But there are a lot of students, and I'm sure a lot of students at City College, who do not feel that way. And the good news is that there are actually steps that you can take to make students feel more at home, more like they belong. Some of them, are tested with research. There are certain messages that seem to work. Certain programs, summer programs, internships that seem to have a really positive effect. But some of them are just sort of common sense, humanistic, emotional, psychological steps that you can take. Just literally saying to students that they belong, that they should feel welcome, that they are welcome on your campus. I think, and the good news about that as well is that's something that everyone can do. It's not something that has to be a task of a certain department in the administration. It's something that fellow students can do, that absolutely professors can do. There are steps I think that everyone can take to make a campus more welcoming. And when that happens, it pays off in a really outsized way, not only for the individual students, but for the institution and in a broader sense for the country.
Paul Tough, thank you very, very much. Thanks for sharing your advice and your advice. Yeah, thanks. It's great to have you with us, and we're excited for you to follow how the Social Mobility Lab moves forward. So thank you so much.
Congratulations on the launch.
Thank you so much. Take care. All right. So now let's hear about social mobility from a more personal perspective. And we're joined by 4 people who have lived it and who have been leaders in helping others achieve it. Cristina Jimenez Moreta immigrated to Queens, New York from Ecuador with her family at the age of 13. She lived undocumented for 12 years, attending high school and college as an undocumented student. She's 2 CUNY degrees. Her undergraduate degree is from CUNY Queens College, and her MPA is from Baruch College. Cristina was the executive director and the founder of United Redream, the largest immigrant youth-led network in the country, and very proud to say she is now a distinguished lecturer at the Colin Powell School. And she is co-chair of Leadership for Democracy and Social Justice, the new CUNY Institute based at the Colin Powell School and at the CUNY School of Labor and Urban Studies. Didi Mozaleski is a native Californian, with a bachelor's degree from San Diego State University and an MA from Penn State University. She joined City College in 2012 as Director of Institutional Advancement and Chief of Staff here at the Colin Powell School, and she is now Vice President of the Office of Institutional Advancement, Communications, and External Relations at CCNY. And she's also Senior Advisor to CCNY's President, Vince Boudreau, and she is the proud parent of a CCNY graduate who has 2 degrees from City College and was my student at one point. And then Elvin Garcia, who is a native New Yorker, a lifelong resident of the Bronx, and a first-generation Dominican American who earned his bachelor's degree at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute and his master's in public administration here at City College. Elvin is currently the Director of Government Relations at NYU. And moderating the next conversation is Bob McKinnon, himself a story of social mobility. Bob is the son of a single mom who raised 3 children by herself. And as he likes to tell audiences, he is a proud former recipient of food stamps, welfare, Medicaid, Pell Grants, student loans, and numerous other government benefits. He is a graduate of Penn State as well, and is now a writer, a designer, a podcast host, a children's author, and a teacher. He's the author most recently of the New York Times bestseller, The 3 Little Engines, which is a modern retelling of the classic, The Little Engine That Could. Bob writes and teaches about issues related to the American dream, and we feel very lucky that he does some of that here at City College. In fact, the Social Mobility Lab is a realization in large part of an idea that Bob shared with me almost 5 years ago, and it's something that he and I have worked on together along with many others in this room. So Bob, thank you. And let me invite you and Christina and Dee Dee and Elvin to come up front.
Welcome, everyone. I'm still wrapping my head around the term moderately selective. I now know why I have a wife. I also want to note that while today we are launching the Social Mobility Lab, we stand on a lot of shoulders of people who've been doing phenomenal work inside the university for a really long time, both in the classroom in terms of helping students and studying this issue. I'm excited to host this panel today. When I was talking to my students this semester, I'm teaching a course called The Economics of Social Mobility. And if we can just pause for a second, I'd like to take attendance. Okay, I'll get that later. Anyways, when I asked them about an event like this, and I said, what would you like to see? The first thing that they had said is, we want to see people whose journeys we can learn from, people who we can relate to. It wasn't about sort of fame, it was about relatable people whose journeys have something to offer us. And so I want to start with just a very basic sort of question and show of hands, so we can all be on the same page. I'm asking of the panelists here, but I encourage all of you to do the same. How many of you are first-generation college students or graduates? Okay. How many of you at some point have experienced some level of poverty in your childhood? Yeah. How many of you have moved up the proverbial ladder? Right. Okay. So I want to ground us in that, because I think sometimes how we show up and how much we feel comfortable sharing aspects of ourselves and our vulnerability is a key step in that belonging. I've done a little bit of research on our panelists today. I won't try to get too personal, but I will share a couple of things that I've seen you say previously that I think is really important for our audience and especially our students to hear. I want to start first. Often when we talk about social mobility and even the questions I just asked, it's sort of grounded in this sort of sense of deficits, things we had to overcome. And instead, when I walk into the classroom and I see my students or I walk around campus, I am blown away at how exceptional and how extraordinary it is that they are just sitting in the classroom to begin with. And so I would love to start with a question not about the headwinds that you've had to overcome, but the tailwinds in your journey that have helped propel you forward. And I guess I'll start with Christina, and then I'll move to Dee Dee, and then back to Elvin. So what are some of the tailwinds that you felt were instrumental in your sort of journey from coming here at the age of 13 to where you are right now?
Well, great to be with all of you, and congratulations on this dream of the center. I will share that as I was hearing, Paul share also his research, I kept coming back to questions of policy and policy choices and how they impacted my life for the better. So when I think about what made possible for me as an undocumented young person coming from a poor and working class background, and fearing deportation in a post 9/11 era in a place like New York, as well as living with a lot of shame about being an immigrant, being undocumented, and my accent. What really made that possible, the change in being able to access higher education, which by policy I was denied the right to when the state decided to bar undocumented students from accessing higher education post 9/11 by instituting international fees to students that like me who grew up here in New York. I think about the students at City College and at CUNY campuses and faculty members and the PSC union, the faculty union, who came together to fight against this policy change in the early 2000s. and partner with civil rights organizations like the Puerto Rican Legal Defense Education Fund and file a lawsuit to change the law. And it was their advocacy and their organizing that made it possible for those in power, elected officials in Albany, and the governor at the time, Governor Pataki, to feel pressured enough and accountable to voters and communities enough to change the policy, allowing undocumented students like me a few months before my first semester to be able to start school. And I can tell you many more stories about how policy decisions have had a huge positive impact in my life and in the life of millions. I will just close. When you think about the deferred action for the Childhood Arrivals Program, we think about that program benefiting over 600,000 undocumented students, undocumented immigrants that were protected by deportation. And again, it was a movement of young people that was able to win that change. But it is also an out of poverty program, because it allowed for thousands of undocumented young people who live in poverty or come from working class communities to have access to higher education and mobility, upper mobility. So I think about policy choices that impacted my life directly, that I wanted to add to Paul's context. You know, the public sounds very big and broad, and I want to be specific that the situation that we're facing with the crisis that Paul described, it is a policy choice. And my story is a testament to how policy choices can create different outcomes.
It's great. A couple of years ago, I went through this journey where I was thanking someone every day during the course of November, and I posted this picture of Claiborne Pell, who used to go jogging in his cut-off sort of business suits. And anyone who's gotten a Pell Grant knows Claiborne Pell was a senator who really sort of championed this. But the idea of giving names and calling out the people who advocate on our behalf, even though we may never see them or know them, I think is really a critical thing to just reward that kind of advocacy. Didi, I wonder if you could sort of talk a little bit about some of the tailwinds that have helped you in your journey.
So I'm also, hand up, first generation, come from a family of single parent, 2 children, grew up all around Southern California military bases, and also experienced extreme poverty. So I want to really key in on this. I'm a military kid who experienced extreme poverty because the country also doesn't recognize its veterans. So I just want to make sure I get that in there. My mom hated dealing with the welfare office, our local Medicaid recertification every year, our housing. So she made me do that stuff. So from about, 7 years old, I was writing letters to Social Security. 10 years old, I was doing recertification forms. That helped me learn how to speak to people whose job it wasn't to help me. And so that helped me think about ways to sort of, you gotta be a hustler in these conversations because people will tell you no all the time. And for me, I'm also a product of the Reagan years. I know I look much younger, but I am, so just, put that out there. And Ronald Reagan was his administration is that wave of change towards funding higher education. So just as brown and black students were coming into higher education, women were coming into higher education, people with disabilities were coming to higher education, California was seeing first, and then the nation saw it afterwards, a decimation of funding for higher education. So I'm also the product of advocates looking at ways to get people into high school summer programs. I'm the product of a program that was designed for children in San Diego who were partly in foster care, also fully on Medicaid or other forms of social service programs to get summer jobs. And that summer job gave me everything about my career now started from being in that summer program. I'm the product of a school system that hired a tremendous number of advisors to help students who looked like me go into colleges that they weren't being recruited into. So I think about all these people, as you said, who are out there sort of advocating for all of us behind the scenes because they were seeing a decimation of pathways. I'm extremely lucky that I was adopted by every person I reached out to. I didn't have to think about applications because I sure didn't know how to fill them out for myself, only for others. I didn't have to think about how I was going to pay for college because somebody helped me figure out that the state should be paying for me. I didn't know any of that because I started a little too young. 7 years old, 8 years old, writing to Social Security is not expertise building for a 16-year-old going to college. So my tailwinds were people fighting against Reagan, to be honest, and me being the beneficiary of that.
Yeah. I also wanted to pull out something you had said, because actually I was just in a meeting recently where this came up as a through line of faculty members' research, which was that sometimes growing up, I'm sure, sort of navigating some of these systems for your mom was a hardship, right? And yet it was probably beneficial in some ways because they're giving you these sorts of skills, and it's the kind of thing, even for our students today who are experiencing the same thing, that when you're in it, it may be hard or it may be really difficult, but it's the kind of thing that will benefit you sort of moving forward because it's building a certain kind of skill set that maybe we often take for granted. Elvin, would you like to share some of your tailwinds?
Sure, and it's great to be back here at City College. I'm a proud alum of the MPA program. I want to emphasize I do not view it as moderately selective as well. I view it as inclusive, strategically inclusive, right, of diversity across the board, including socioeconomic diversity, and obviously CUNY is a great model. In thinking about tailwinds as it relates to both policy but also our personal experiences, I mean, you know, personal stories, our own personal struggles, if you will, inform policy. And so for me, tailwinds very much included my mother's resilience coming in as an immigrant from the Dominican Republic with barely an 8th grade education, knowing barely any English. Both my siblings and I starting out in the public school system as English second language learners. But you know, further tailwinds were the fact that I was fortunate to be the baby in the family and had 2 older sisters that were both SUNY and CUNY graduates to sort of create that pipeline for me. And a tailwind that became sort of a headwind was I was fortunate to be a recipient of the Higher Education Opportunity Program HEOP scholarship. It's EOP for private institutions at RPI, Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. What happened halfway through my undergraduate experience at RPI, this is post-2008 financial crisis, was that our university leadership had decided that they were going to phase out the HEOP program. And now we were going to be taken care of through graduation, but again, my mother raised me right enough to still realize that the ladder that I was literally climbing halfway through was no longer going to be available for students from my neighborhood. And ironically enough, other private institutions, like the one that I work in now, NYU and even Columbia, still have robust HEOP programs. The excuse at the time was due to the economics of the post-2008 financial crisis that we were going to phase out HEOP and replace it with something else. And I was proud to have organized fellow HEOP students to really call, you know, speak truth to power on that issue. And so I think this is a great, exciting time to launch the Social Mobility Lab. I think at the core of what City College and CUNY stands for is an opportunity to give the working class a leg up, where otherwise in other aspects of our day-to-day lives, we see those opportunities shrink. And so I think it's vitally important, and it's always great to see you, Professor.
Thank you. So I'm going to get back on resilience in a little bit, but I want to go to, again, it's a little hard for some of us who are older, sort of trying to go back in the Wayback Machine and remember what it was like stepping on a college campus. But I'm wondering if you could sort of think about the college experience that you had, understanding, you know, as Paul had mentioned in his remarks, this sort of critical aspect of not always feeling like we belong, which we'll talk a bit later. But I'm wondering if there were things about that college experience that you're like, looking back, I wish I would have done this, or I wish I would have done that, or I wish this would have been available. I remember when I was in college, I felt such incredible, I was so fortunate that I was able to go. I was also the baby in my family. My older siblings took paths that were vocational. And so I felt very blessed, but I also felt a great deal of pressure. And so I had, on the top of my desk every semester, I'd write a name of a different family member who I was saying, this is the family member I'm dedicating this semester to, right? Which is not to say that I didn't go out or party or do that, but it did mean that I didn't do a lot of other things. I didn't sort of get into clubs. I didn't do the kinds of things because I was so focused on sort of my grades and my responsibility, and I had to work and all those kinds of things. So I'm wondering if, and now I'm like, I wish maybe if I took a little bit of loan out more, I would have been able to do more of those things or have more of those opportunities. So I'm wondering if you look back at your experience and you're like, I wish I would have done or been able to do this, what kind of support would you have liked? And I'll start with Dee Dee, because I think at one point you called higher education, specifically City College, like the great equalizer, right? Because it does have that opportunity, but it also sort of assumes that we're able to take advantage of it all, which often we aren't. And so I wonder if you could just sort of start with some of your experience.
I don't know what college is like for someone who works 3 jobs, so someone here tell me. So first of all, for those of you who have met me before, my mom kicked me out of the house on my high school graduation day. She'd given me a choice of either joining the military or going to nursing school. I wanted to go to San Diego State, and she said, if you make that choice, then you can't live here anymore. So my first 2 or 3 months were spent trying to sort of cobble together housing. And I did that by lying about my age and having a team of people around me who took pity on me. I worked 3 jobs. I got married very young. I got married at 19. So I was 3 years into my college experience. And my final year of college, my then husband said, we're moving to New York, just got out of the military, and he wanted to be home in the Bronx, so we were gonna come here. And what he said to me was, actually what his mother said as well, was if I elected to come here and finish my degree, our marriage wouldn't work out. And she was 100% right, it did not. But I now have 2 degrees, so it's okay. So I don't know what it's like. I don't know what I missed. I used to see, sororities doing their thing. I used to see people having parties on weekends. I lived off campus, so I didn't get to do any of that. I would have loved that. And now I'm in school as an adult, and I'm the anomaly. I'm the oldest person in all my classes. Nobody wants to hang out with the 50-year-old, and that's fine too. But I don't know. I wish I could go back and do one fun thing for myself in college. So if anybody wants to take me into their class and let me have a full college experience, I'm ready.
Christina, what about you? What would you?
I relate. I feel like I was so active. I'm the total opposite in many ways. I was just doing so much in student clubs and student government and organizing students in the college, outside of college, in the community. And so much of my experience was actually about survival, that I do wish I would have gone party more,
Hold on a second. I just want to make sure the takeaway from this entire event for students listening is not to go out and party more. A little bit. Go ahead, sorry.
You're always going to get the real talk from me, so, I think it's a balance. I do think I was definitely more on the extreme side, out of really survival as an undocumented working class student that didn't have a lot of support to navigate. And I wish I would have had more professors that look like me. I wish that I would have had more conversations on campus about the toll that oppression and systematic discrimination has on your mental health and of your sense of worth. Because at some point, as an undocumented person, growing up in this country, the narrative that as immigrants, and particularly if you're undocumented, you don't deserve anything. It's something that at some point you kind of internalized. And for me, I kind of went by for many years believing in that false narrative. And it wasn't until I found belonging in a community, which happened in my high school experience, but also happened in college, and the way that it happened was thanks to a few college professors and administrators, many of them people of color, who reached out to me intentionally to have conversations about how they could be supportive of my immigration status as I navigated school, and who push to challenge unjust policies within our institutions to make sure that students like me had opportunity to access certain programs and certain opportunities. So, and lastly, I will say, I now can name it after having lots of therapy work, and thankfully I have health insurance. I work, which is very different from my life as an undergraduate. I understand now that I was running high on anxiety and depression, and that multiple times I had panic attacks. But I did not have a lot of the support that I think I see students getting now, which is why I'm so grateful and proud of being part of CUNY and being back in the community, and particularly Colin Powell, for making such effort intentionally to have conversations about mental health, and Paul referred to this as well, and to provide services to students in a way that feels safe and empowering. And if I could, the last thing I will say, if I could do a little bit something, just better or different, is to ensure that we're figuring out ways that students know everything that we have available for them here. Anyways, I have lots of ideas about how we can do that through digital strategies and talking to students on TikTok and other forms. But I think we've learned. I think as an institution, and seeing the programs and the levels of support that we provide to students is very inspiring, and it's exactly what we need to be doing.
Yeah, that question of deservedness, I think, is so key, because sometimes you don't feel, even if these things you know about them, they're available, maybe you don't feel like you deserve to access them. Or sometimes, sadly, the people who are administrating them don't make them feel as welcome as they could be. I know that's been the experience I had when, grocery shopping with my mom with food stamps, and someone looking at you askance in terms of what was in your cart. And recently, I was interviewing Brittany Means, also has an incredible story, an immigrant. She's now a successful author, and she had told a story as a child where she was going to school and she didn't have a pencil, and she asked the teacher for a pencil, and the teacher gives her a pencil, but it doesn't have an eraser on it. And she said, "Excuse me, could I get a pencil with an eraser?" And the teacher looked at her and said, "Beggars can't be choosers." And then she was like, "It's not like I wanted not to bring a pencil. I just didn't want to have one at home. And I didn't think it was too much to ask for one with an eraser. And all kids deserve an eraser, right? And all students deserve the support they need to make sure they can get through college, right?"
I just want to add something quickly, because I think what you're laying out here is the important role of educators, and how important it is for students not only to have faculty and educators that look like themselves, but that also relate and understand their experience. I had an Italian-American guidance counselor in high school who straight up told me, "I can't help you, you're undocumented, and you're not going to college." And that was that. And this is, right as I'm a senior and 9/11 happened, so very traumatic event for me and my family. But in digging and talking to other educators in my school, I have this Jewish American educator who was my Key Club advisor and my ESL counselor, and she said, "I don't know how to help students like you, but I'm gonna figure it out, and I'm gonna help you apply to the City University of New York." So the power that educators hold as gatekeepers and administrators hold as gatekeepers is so key, because in essence, we have the power to either open the door or shut the door for students.
Excellent point. Elvin, what about you? What are some things about your experience that you were, in hindsight, you wish you would have had access to, or things could have been available to you that would have made your journey a little easier?
Yeah, I think for my undergraduate experience, I did not have the luxury or the privilege to slip up, and so did not take advantage of a lot of the extracurricular activities at first. Though that changed over time. I think, having grown up in the Bronx and now being on top of this hill, this beautiful campus, this top-tier institution, I realized now that I could have done a better job of building a better sense of community. The student population within the School of Architecture of color, in particular, was a lot smaller than the engineering school, which was roughly 30%. We were less than 5%, I think, within the School of Architecture. And in retrospect, I think all of us that were students of color there was such a micro minority within the overall population of the architecture school, we all sort of felt like, we individually had our own journeys, and we all individually had our own struggles, and nobody wanted to say the quiet part out loud, and maybe we could have, I think, worked a little closer. I would always envy the engineering kids that would always organize work study together, Black, Latino, Asian, within the different cohorts at every level, freshman to senior. And so that's one thing that I think. Also, leaning in a little bit more on my professors, who I think were, there was sort of a cultural, artificial barrier. I had a bit of imposter syndrome sort of being there, first and foremost, but also some of these professors were white and affluent, and they were welcoming towards me and supportive, but I always felt a bit reserved about asking for help, because then that would sort of feed back into whether or not I really belonged and whether or not I was performing at the level that I should have. And in retrospect, I could have been a little bit more open-minded. At City College, while getting my MPA, there was one classmate, sort of on the flip side, who was struggling and ultimately had dropped out of the program. We had a small cohort within the MPA program, 20 students or so, which really created a great dynamic, because in terms of the attention you get from professor to student was great. But I would have, looking back, I would have built a greater sense of camaraderie within my fellow students, given that while I was at the MPA program, a lot of us had more of the similar struggles. It was more homogeneous, and I think we could have gone a little bit more above and beyond to make sure that we all rose and graduated together coming in. Together.
I mean, so you're touching on the idea of community and social capital, and it is sometimes just more difficult for certain students to sort of really tap into that. I've noticed even with my students in terms of some questions, like how often they'll sit in a classroom for an entire year and not know the names of their fellow students, or that group projects are more difficult because of work schedules and out-of-class commitments. It's a commuter school, so there's no sort of built-in, so there's a lot of things that make the building of social capital a little bit more challenging, but yet it is so critical, in terms of that network, both who can help you while you're here and in the midst of it and trying to figure out how to get access to resources or get through a specific struggle, or just someone to listen to you. And then once you're out, people who you can call upon and say like, hey, remember we had this class together, and I need a little hand getting a job or a connection. So super critical. I want to talk a little bit about a couple of things that I saw each of you say over the course of the last several years, and I'm going to read a quote, and I just want you to react to it because it touches on some themes that have come up over the course of the conversation. Start with Dee Dee first. The quote was, quote, "I'm a kid that grew up on welfare, so the idea that I am now sitting in an office like this and overseeing budgets of hundreds of millions of dollars, it doesn't always feel real to me. I wasted too much of my time earlier in my career trying to wrap my head around the fact that I had gotten the job. So my second piece of advice would be to not make the same mistake I did. Don't waste time thinking you don't belong, you do." So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about, because it's easy to say like, oh, just feel like you belong. Elvin just mentioned this sort of idea like imposter. I feel like an imposter sitting up here right now, who am I to be talking to you? And so it is something that's easier said than done. And I'm wondering how you have, over the course of time just felt like you belong more, and how you might give counsel to others who are going to go through that same struggle that is not solved in a week or a year, but something that's you carry with you.
So first of all, I'm tearing up now, which will tell you all how I feel about that. So I'm very lucky. I want to give my boss a quick shout out. If it were left up to me, I would spend my time probably 7 days a week on campus, in my office, getting work done. I would not take advantage of fun things on campus because I would be too busy trying to get things done for the college. So that's me. My boss, however, a few years ago made it a requirement of my position that I find ways of getting myself out of my own office. And I will put my team first for everything. I will put them up for everything. I will celebrate them for everything, and I will hide behind the work. So it's a constant struggle for me every day. I'm well aware that in my office, in my position, I don't look like any of my predecessors, and I'm hyper aware of that. I'm also well aware that when I took this position, people had challenges with my look. They had challenges because I don't dress like my predecessors. As you can see, I've got tattoos, I've got a few piercings, I've got giant hair, and I know that that put people off. And my first couple of years here, people would say, you're the vice president, and I would, make them feel comfortable in their own ignorance, but it's still something they said to me. And so I spent a lot of time doing two things. It's very important for me to know what I'm talking about, so I spend a lot of time researching things before I say them. It's also really important that when you come to my office, you feel welcome, and you feel like you're the first person to show up in my office who's ever had a question, so you should feel confident asking it, because I didn't always have that. And so a lot of my work is spent making others feel comfortable, and a lot of that comes from having been that little kid working with Social Security, foster care, the Medicaid office, learning diplomacy and getting people to want to do things I'd like them to do. I bet you we all can do that really well, right? But I gotta say, every day, and I'm not embarrassed to say this, I remind myself on a regular basis, not that I deserve to be here, but that I deserve all the things that have happened to me over my career. I've put the work in. I've done the things that you're supposed to do. I've gotten the education. I've tried to be kind to people all the time. I've tried to learn new things every day. But I do remind myself, I spend a lot of time in therapy, having reminded myself that my upbringing is a piece of who I am, and that's something to celebrate, not to be embarrassed by.
Thank you. And sorry, I didn't mean to make you cry. Yeah. Elvin, I want to turn to you and something that you had said, and now I feel bad because I'm actually quoting a former paper he wrote in class. So it is earlier writing. So at this core, this concept of the American dream must also be about overcoming obstacles and engaging in resilient risk-taking. And then you go on to say, losing my race for city council resulted in me going into a deep depression because I allowed my life and my American dream to be completely and exclusively centered on becoming an elected official. I learned a lot from loss, as one usually does, and now I find myself thinking more comprehensively and thoughtfully about how to define and strive for my American dream. My pursuit of happiness is the journey. Reaching it defines my American dream. The self-conscious, defined dream keeps me grounded in what is essential to make the most of my life.
I wrote that?
You did. Yeah. No, I swear you did. Reflecting on that idea of resilience and this idea that sometimes, I remember even my own journey, you have this idea of success being defined as how much money I'm going to make, or this kind of accomplishment that's outwardly facing versus being happy every day with who you are in this sort of pursuit of happiness and the journey of it. I'm wondering if you could just talk about the resilience of having things that didn't go well for you and now being, on a journey where you're successful and seems very happy. And so I'm wondering if you could just sort of share a little bit about what that's been like.
No, sure. And I mean, I think at the core of it, success is not linear, despite what Instagram tells you or whatever self-help book or whatever motivational speaker likes to articulate in a 10-point plan for achieving a particular goal. I mean, I think I've had ups and downs just like everyone on this panel and everyone in this room. And it's important to know that the ups and downs, particularly in the downs of this journey that you're going through, that's where you just learn the most. I think coming into the MPA program when I did, I felt like I was Tom Hanks at the end of Castaway, where he just didn't know which direction to go. I mean, I was singularly focused on wanting to be a member of the city council, and that was it. To the sacrifice of personal relationships and other sacrifices. And so coming here actually, helped me get out of that dark cloud and refocus, my passions, my interests that led to, as a CUNY grad in the MPA program to, one of the largest funders of human rights work at the Open Societies Foundations. That was because of my time here at City College that, led me to now, also, serve the mission of another great institution of higher education here within New York State. And so I think risk taking is a painful necessity, and we only learn and grow by taking that leap. I don't think we can, you never really truly live playing it safe. And it's okay if your goals change over time. I don't know if you caught the fact that I majored in architecture originally. That is a long story, but let's just say I wanted to operate more at a human scale, right? I was obviously active on campus and was engaged in Alianza Latina. I was the president of that group on campus. I had pledged a historically Latino fraternity. I worked my way through government. I finished my degree reluctantly. I had one professor, I won't use his exact words, but he told me to just finish. He used some other terminology, and I did. But through those ups and downs, my goals have changed. I didn't achieve certain benchmarks the way that I wanted, but you still come out of it a much stronger individual, and it's about the bigger picture of taking that leap of faith, still getting up and putting on your shoes and getting yourself out there. The destination really is almost irrelevant when you look back at the journey of who you've become because of these ups and downs is really what makes you a better person.
Great, thanks. And that's going to segue really nicely into my quote for Christina, which I'm going to give you the quote. Before you comment, I'm going to also ask you a question about sort of a story that led into this, which was, I think that organizing and becoming an activist saves your life because it gives you the opportunity to have a sense of your own power, even when you think that you don't have any. And I want you to talk about this idea of feeling your own power. And I also thought it might be instructive if you start with a story I heard, which involves, I think it was your brother, stop and frisk, and then you really taking charge, which I just thought was so powerful and courageous, and I think would be instructive for others to hear, if you don't mind.
Yeah, I'll start with the story. I think that many of us here probably know about stop and frisk and the power that the NYPD and the police force has and has had over time in racially profiling people of color in this country and in New York City. And my brother one day was coming back home from school. He was nearly 12 years old. And he gets home just shocked and shaking, and he's all pale. And I'm just, as the older sister, I am concerned, and I'm asking him, what happened to you? And he starts telling me the story of a cop that stopped him a few blocks away from our house and physically assaulted him. No reason other than him being a brown kid walking in the street in New York City. And I was full with, pain and rage to see my brother go through such act of violence. And my mother and I, and my mother had a moment of learning. Like, she had learned police are supposed to keep us safe. Like, we trust police. Like, they're here to take care of us. And that afternoon, suddenly she realized that wasn't the truth. So both of us decided to walk to the police station nearby in Jackson Heights, where we grew up, prison 113. And I walked into the room and I said, I want to talk to the lead officer here. And the white man in uniform says, it's me. What do you want? And I tell him that I want to file a complaint against one of the officers that assaulted my brother just a few hours ago. And he laughed at me. And he laughed in a way where, it just sends you the message that I hold power, you don't. And it's really funny that you're trying to hold us accountable. And so he said, you can file a complaint with the independent Civic Review Commission, where you could file complaints of police abuse and violence. But feeling even like, and I end the story there, and I share with you that I was not always that courageous, right? Like, imagine an undocumented person. I mean, we fear that we could be profiled, detained, deported. That interaction itself could have ended up with me and my family being deported. But the reason why I had the courage to do that is because I had already started my involvement in the immigrant justice movement and movements here in New York City fighting against police brutality and racial profiling. And it wasn't just about knowing my rights. At that point, I had also learned from the students and the faculty that changed the policy here at CUNY so that students like me could come to school. I had also learned that we had the power to organize and stop deportations. And it's that experience that your voice, your story, and you taking action collectively, not individually alone, collectively with other people, can create change. And to find the courage for me to be able to just walk into that prison and try to talk to the officer about a complaint, it was because I had in some way had already a taste of that power. And I was learning that by using my voice and my actions, I could hold institutions that are accountable to serve communities, to do right by us, and to do what they're supposed to do. So, I wouldn't be here if it wasn't, as I said, for my work in the movement, and it is both in college and in the immigrant justice movement that I found community and I found my voice and courage to do everything that I have done.
That's awesome. And so again, we just heard sort of three things about social mobility that maybe we don't always sort of hear. This idea that you have power, you belong sort of to be moving up in life, and how you find happiness can change, and the notion of being resilient and being able to adapt is so critical. I want to end with giving you each an opportunity to say one last thing, and I want to try to end on sort of a very hopeful note. Recently, I took my class on the world's worst field trip, which was basically walking down one flight of steps from the 7th floor in NAC to 6. And we did it because I wanted them to see the timeline that's on the wall there of General Powell and his life, and to take notice of the different things along his journey that were instrumental to his success. Like, for example, he was a presidential fellow, so fellowships, or his friends were noted, or the relationships, or there was luck that he wasn't injured more seriously in Vietnam, and a whole host of other things. And then as an assignment, they were asked to imagine themselves 30 years from now, the same sort of length of time on his timeline, or at least a portion of it, and to what their future looked like. And I got to tell, I was just so blown away at the level of optimism, at the spirit which they brought, how much they wanted to give back. The number of students who wanted to get a home for their mom was pretty remarkable, which is great. But it was so hopeful, right? And it reminds us what the sort of the mission is and why we have this lab in the first place, right? Which is not just a sort of the only reason to study social mobility is to create more of it, right? And so, with that in mind, sort of thinking about sort of their journey, our journey as a lab, their journey as students, and what that looks like the next year or 5 years or 10 years, when we know all kinds of things are going to happen, politically, socially, economically. Any sorts of words of wisdom or hopeful note to end on. I'm just going to sort of keep talking for a couple seconds so I don't sort of call someone out who's still in the middle of thought. Elvin?
Words of wisdom. No, I think this social mobility lab will serve as a catalyst to what already City College and CUNY overall does so well. CUNY City College is both accessible, affordable, and achievable because it tailors to working class folks that are not already in the upper, strata of higher income and therefore have the greatest potential to climb, right? And so I think as the economy becomes more complex, as there are more difficult budget challenges on the horizon, as demographics change, as the cost of living changes, as the rent gets too damn high, as the advent of AI starts to change all aspects of life, the way that we work and learn. It's important to have this catalyzing effect within the research that's going to be conducted within the social mobility lab to ensure that folks don't fall through the cracks. Because throughout history, as we've learned, hopefully we'll continue to learn, throughout every major technological innovation, those of us less fortunate, if you will, or front lines, folks in the front lines of our communities, of issues, tend to fall through the cracks. And so I think that gives me hope, Professor, that you're launching this lab here at City College. And you can count on me to help and support any way that I can.
Awesome. Thank you. Christina?
I'll get to your question, but I want to start with a bit of a conversation I had recently with the Surgeon General. And he is touring across the country, visiting colleges, and particularly paying attention to parent communities and student communities. Now, you may ask why. Why is our Surgeon General doing that? Well, one of the things that he's identified from a health perspective is that we are in a crisis of isolation and loneliness, exacerbated by two factors: technology. Just to call you in, like how many times did you check out of this conversation and went to your phone? And also by the pandemic. And I think, we barely keep conversation about the pandemic, but I think it's really important for us to speak about the consequences and the impact that it's had on society as a whole. And even for me, as a distinguished lecturer now, from students, I hear there's the struggle in showing up to class when we went for a long time on the Zoom world. So that also exacerbated depression, isolation, and loneliness. So when we hear the high rates, particularly among young people, the students at universities, experiencing isolation, what I think about is how colleges and universities can play probably one of the most powerful interventions that we can in this crisis by leveraging our resources, our buildings, our centers, the new center here, to really tackle the question of how we can build community and give people what they're seeking. They're seeking belonging and community. And when you look at some of the research around belonging, we ought to realize that human beings are emotional beings first. Like that means that we have to do all of the academic, intellectual work here at universities, but also keep in mind that it's really about the hearts and emotions and the spiritual resilience of people. So I have a lot of hope, given some of the new programming and services that we're providing now at the university. And also hopeful that we could have more conversations about how to leverage the power that we have as public institutions, where we have millions of students enroll in a crisis of isolation, where we can make the difference. And I share this because I see it. I see how many faculty members are doing so much work to build community in our classrooms, to not just have a student-educator relationship, but to really build community and to support our students. So not only that they feel that they belong, but they feel that I'm here to back them up and to support them. So so that's where my hope is, and what I think the huge opportunity that we have.
Thank you. Didi?
So I should say, because I'm from San Diego, genetically, I only am able to have hope. Just keep that, all right? Regardless of the all-black clothing. So I'm going to pick up on everything my colleagues here have said, and I want to add something. So I hope that all of us wake up every day showing up for ourselves, but I really hope you're showing up for someone else as well. We all know what we come to campus with. We know what we go home with. We don't always know what our friends, our peers, our faculty, the staff that we work with are going through. And so a lot of our job a lot of our being should be about showing up for someone else. If you see someone else struggling, it's okay to ask them how they're doing, and it's also okay to find someone on campus who can help them. So that's piece one. And piece two is we're an advocacy-based campus. We're a social justice-based campus. The founding of the university system, us, the flagship college, was based on advocacy for others. So you should feel absolutely the ability to step into that space and advocate for others every single day while you're thinking about advocating for yourself. So I absolutely have hope all the time. I think this is a fantastic initiative. I hope all of you find ways to get involved, and I hope you all find ways to keep all of us involved.
Well, one, thank you all for coming today and being so vulnerable and open and sharing your journeys and your words of hope and advice. Congratulations on your journey and where it's taken you thus far. We're going to wrap up the panel now and ask you to return to the seats in the front and invite President of City College Vince Boudreau to come up and say a final closing thoughts of reflection.
I want to just talk about two kind of moments that I've had in the last 2 weeks. And you know, there was a time on this campus when we talked about social mobility. Before Raj Chetty did his big data study, we would tell stories of students we knew. And they were great stories, you know, remarkable stories. But in a way, it was all we had. We didn't collect the data ourselves. It wasn't available out there. So we were pretty sure we were doing the work that is described here and described subsequently in that data. But we didn't know. And so we've had a gala or a lunch with scholarship donors. We would have one or two students come up and tell their story. And it would always be a story of triumph over adversity. And the implication was you can generalize that across the campus. And then, of course, Raj Chetty does his work, and we have, you know, all of this rich statistical analysis that sort of allows us to put those stories in the context of larger social trends. But there's also something kind of empty about a story that's told only statistically. So let me tell you what last week was for me. First of all, Andy invited, it's not really the right word, required that I attend 3 separate events last week. And one of them was the 15-year anniversary of the program that started as the Skadden Arps program, is now the honors program in legal studies. And the latest one was a 20-year anniversary of a group that he organized and I tagged along with that went to the Democratic National Convention in Boston 20 years ago. This is where Barack Obama gave the keynote address and John Kerry was named as the president. And in between that, a group of international studies students who had worked with and were felt indebted to Marina Fernando got together to contribute to a named professorship in her name. And in that room and on Zoom were students. Some of them had graduated in 1994 and 1995, you know, all the way back. And so in 3 days, I got a view of not one student, you know, but also not, you know, 3 million or 30 million statistical lives as represented by Raj Chetty, but something in between, like a significant number of students who had been at City College and were all doing wonderfully, and we're happy to talk about their lives and their successes. And you know, I spend a lot of time with alumni that are 70 years old and 80 years old and older. And this was a group, you know, I had in my classroom lots and lots of those students. So that was fantastic, and it gave me a kind of sense of filling in a gap in that spectrum between the stories of individuals and the statistical stories we tell. So that was last week. Let me tell you about today. Today, this is my second launch event. Earlier today, was anyone at the Immigrant Student Center ribbon cutting earlier today? Yeah, one. What's interesting about that and interesting about this together is that it's the third of these centers that we have in CUNY, but the only one that in its name integrates not just the provision of resources and advice and support to students, but also research about the success of immigrants and how you do it and how you provide it. And I was thinking as I was watching this panel, I mean, here we have a professor, an alum, a director of a center, and a member of the staff, all talking from their expertise about social mobility and what it means to have that kind of a journey. And it made me think of something I talked about a lot in the first year or two that I was president, about a vision for this campus that was not a school, right? Not just a place where you, because we talk all the time about excess and excellence and providing opportunity to students, and you can get a good education here, and all of that's true. But I thought it was a pale vision of what we should be. Because what we have on this campus is a representation of expertise in areas that are absolutely underrepresented in the larger discourse. And you know, the questions aren't asked about things like social mobility. It's a puzzle to people why we have no social mobility. And we know a lot more about social mobility on this campus than on a lot of other campuses. And the same is true with the experience of stop and frisk and why it was so corrosive, because our community has been stopped and frisked. The same is true about the experience of immigrants. You go down the line about things that are under-discussed or under-theorized or under-problematized, or theorized and problematized from a perspective that is under-informed personally and experientially about these issues. And so here we are today with these two centers, these two institutions that are being formed, centered around the expertise that we have as a community. And I think that it touches really on this Christina, you talked about the power that you have. Well, part of the power that we have is a really rarefied, underrepresented, deeply felt, beautifully nuanced set of experiences, insights, motivations, perspectives on policy questions that we just don't talk about enough in this country. You think about income inequality, the kind of dark alter ego of social mobility. We talk about income inequality as if it's just kind of a mystery. Like, we have it, it's really bad, things get worse as incomes get more and more unequal. But how do you theorize it? And how do you theorize it from the perspective of people that are trying to figure out how to solve it? One of the quotes that I give around social mobility, I've lifted, and he knows this, I've lifted from a talk I heard Andy give when he was running the Roosevelt Institute. You were introducing Joe Stiglitz. And so, quoting Joseph Stiglitz, he said, in the contemporary America, social mobility is a statistical anomaly. If it exists, it's just like, it's like weird. That's what you've got to explain, not the obverse, why we don't have social mobility. We have an opportunity on this campus, not just in the realm of social mobility, but in the realm of immigration studies and police studies, and you know, what are the engineering and scientific questions that would be deeply beneficial to underserved communities that we're not asking, or we're asking in a different way. We have the opportunity to claim the power that we have, that you all have, by virtue of your experience. And so what I love about this is that this is, you know, Bob and Andy have been working on this for 5 years, but your faculty and your colleagues as students have been asking and living and working towards this moment for years. And so I just think this is a kind of a seminal moment for what it means for City College to be not just a school, but an institution. So I want to congratulate all of you for this hard work. I want to make sure I echo Andy's invitation to get involved in this. This is an opportunity for us to say that as City College, by virtue of who we are, we've got something really important to say, and you better listen to us. So congratulations, really a pleasure to be here. A joy to listen to these panels, and want to thank Andy and Bob and people like Prabal and Bob Malera, who did some of the foundational work, and all the rest of you who foundational research around where social mobility sits at City College, and all the rest of you who maybe I don't know that you've been doing this work, but it's crucial for us. And I think it's not just crucial, it can be definitive of who we are and why we matter. So congratulations and thank you.